Here's a comment I read yesterday. Name omitted because the penalty for leaving Islam is death, writes David. I really want to thank you for all the efforts you did in studying about Islam and sharing all the truth you found with us through YouTube. I remember the first video I saw of you was Zakir Naik is a joke. At that moment, I was like, who the censored is this guy calling Zakir Naik a joke? Then I again found you on YouTube 4 months from then, and at that time I was trying to search more and more truth about Islam, and you seemed very reliable as you were giving the references as proof. Though it hurt a lot, I could move on from Islam and leave it, and your video in which you were sharing your testimony, that made me really go deep and search more about Christ. If it wasn't for you, I would have still been saying there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. Words aren't enough to thank you because you introduced me to Jesus through whom I can be saved, and I think there was God definitely involved in this process because I mostly doubt and don't believe easily, but I even tried showing your 30-minute video of why I am a Christian to my classmates, but everyone else found it silly, whereas I found it as one of the best videos anyone could share. So, just thank you. Now, what started this young man on his path to conversion? Zakir Naik. He had confidence in Zakir Naik. Later, he saw that someone was claiming that Zakir Naik is a joke. He wanted to see what possible basis there could be for calling Zakir Naik a joke. Then he did some investigating and eventually found out that Zakir Naik is a joke, that Naik's arguments are horrible, that he backs down from every challenge from every experienced Christian debater in the world. And that's when he realized that he couldn't simply base his faith on what he had heard from people like Zakir Naik. He needed to study and seek the truth for himself. And now he's a Christian. Mark my words, Zakir Naik is going to help us lead more Muslims to Christ than anyone else in history. Zakir Naik has built his career on the methods of his mentor, Ahmed Deedat. Deedat's method was simple. If you get an audience full of ignorant people, you can say pretty much whatever you want, and no one's going to know if you're lying to them. If someone eventually decides to do some research and figures out that you're making things up, it doesn't matter because you've already deceived thousands of people into agreeing with you. Who cares about the few who recognize that you're lying when you've already won a mob who can shout them down? So Deedat understood that all you need to do is sound like you know what you're talking about. Just sound persuasive. It doesn't matter if you're spouting total nonsense as long as it sounds good. Deedat influenced people like Naik and others who now use the same method. But there's a problem with this method. When someone eventually catches you lying, they're not going to trust you anymore. So there's always the long-term risk that you ultimately end up destroying your credibility. If I wanted to, I could go around making things up, and I'm sure I could convince gullible people to believe the things I was making up. I could go around telling people, did you know that NASA has discovered the words, Jesus is Lord, written on Mars? It's true. How can we explain this? Surely Christianity must be the truth. There are people in the world who would convert to Christianity if they believed what I was saying, but it wouldn't take long for people to see that I was making these things up. Now, for apologists like Zakir Naik, it doesn't really matter if people catch you making things up as long as most people don't catch you. And in the days of Deedat, this was a very successful method because when someone went to the library, did some studying, and realized that Deedat was lying, what was he going to do about it? He could go tell some people that Deedat's a liar, but Deedat would already be speaking to the next packed out auditorium. So Deedat would get away with it. What's different now? Well, now we've got the internet. Now we're in a position to expose people who've built their Dawa empires on deception. Now, when a young man realizes that Zakir Naik is a deceiver, he can tell other people around the world what he's learned. This reminds me of ancient Persia. The Persian Empire tried repeatedly to invade Greece. When they would invade, the Greeks would join forces and stop the Persians from conquering Greece. But the Greeks were still terrified of the Persian Empire because it was massive. Many years later, the Greeks were still scared of the Persians. But travelers kept coming back to Greece during the reign of Philip of Macedon. And they would say, you know that massive empire that everyone is scared of? Their forts are falling apart. Their soldiers are lying around drunk. If someone were to take a well-trained army, even a much smaller army than theirs, he could wreak havoc on the Persian Empire. Philip's son, Alexander the Great, did just that. He invaded the Persian Empire with a much smaller force than the Persians had, and he crushed them. What looked like an incredibly powerful empire was actually a house of cards. You could knock it right over. Islam, as an ideology, is like that. It seems powerful to many people because it has so many adherents. But it's been spread with such a shocking degree of deception. The Quran's been perfectly preserved. There are scientific miracles in the Quran. Muhammad is mentioned by name in the Bible. So many ridiculously false claims that it's basically begging for a small, well-trained group of apologists to expose it like nothing's ever been exposed before. So, while it may be discouraging to watch Zakir Naik speak to a room filled with people and feed them nothing but lies, while it may break your heart to watch so many people buying outright deception, don't lose sight of the fact that for every lie he tells, for every person he deceives, he's setting himself up for a bigger fall. Every lie he tells is an opportunity for us to expose him and to show his listeners that they have to stop trusting their leaders and to start studying for themselves. When they do that, they're leaving Islam. This is going to be a slow and difficult process at first because the technology we're using is still pretty new and most people still know next to nothing about Islam. But as more and more young Muslims recognize that they've been lied to and they start sharing what they've learned, we're going to see a snowball effect. In the end, what are we going to say to Zakir Naik? We're going to say, thank you, Zakir Naik, not for deceiving people, not for promoting jihad, but for helping us to lead so many Muslims to Christ. Now, I said it here, it's public record. Catch me in a few years and tell me I was wrong about this.